Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, Sheri Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on December 8th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, before I get into this week's Astro news you can use, and there is quite a bit of it, I just want to give you my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen to this podcast anytime by simply going to my website at KARMIC and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled podcast. You can also find me on most of your favorite podcast stations. And, if you go through KarmicEvolution.com, you can also listen to the archived recordings if there's anything you've missed or anything you wanted to listen to again. And if you do go to the website, what you'll see is your downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our individual sun sign, needs to be happy. So make sure you avail yourself of that if you're interested. And yes, it'll sign you up for my weekly Conversations About Consciousness astrology newsletter, but of course you can unsubscribe from that anytime. So be sure to grab How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy when you listen to this podcast, again, whether you do so live or later, and enjoy some of Stephen Forrest's astrological words of wisdom. Separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, and that's where you can keep track of my upcoming podcast content and other astro news you can use. And I'm posting on Instagram now as well, so feel free to follow me there too. In addition, I'm offering still, and this is a good time to purchase a gift either for yourself or for a friend or, other friend, family member, colleague, whatever, who, child, parent, sister, brother, whatever, who is an astrology enthusiast. And that's my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for listeners only, for only $99. So if you're interested in astrology and you'd like to learn more about the true meaning of your individual natal chart, this is essentially a snapshot of the exact position of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth, and it reveals a great deal about you. So if you choose to use it as a tool for soul growth, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading can be tremendously helpful if you want to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, if you'd like to move from chaos to clarity about what might be holding you back in any areas of concern, including your relationships, your career, your financial situation, and or your health, as those are the 4 categories people are usually interested in. That's because, like I've said, a natal chart reading can lead to the understanding also of healing old karmic wounds by greater understanding where they originated from and how they may have been carried forward into this lifetime. And in doing so, can help you to co-create your own future happiness and success through such astrological insight. So this is easy when you take advantage of my 1 hour, $99 discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading, again for listeners only. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. And you can find easy access to this offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic99. And finally, the Astrological Society of Princeton is still taking signups for my new evolutionary astrology class titled Fate, Free Will, and Your Soul's Evolution. And this class is for those who, similar to wanting if you want your own reading, that's the Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading. But if you'd like to learn more about your chart on your own, and or those of friends and family members and lovers, etc., this is a class for those who want to learn to read charts from an evolutionary astrological perspective, which gives you a leg up, again, on learning the truth about past life karma and your soul's evolution. So during this 8-week course, I will teach you how to decipher and synthesize how the nodes in your chart, that's the nodes of the moon, which are representative of karma and fate versus free will, and aspects to and from those rulers of both the north and the south nodes help tell one's past life story and how this influences your present life. So again, the class can help you move from chaos to clarity through astrological insight about one's true soul purpose in this lifetime, about what might be blocking you or someone now based on what I call past soul conditioning, and learning how understanding this can help you or others to overcome blockages and succeed in the areas where karma or karmic happenings may feel like they prevent you from progressing in this lifetime. And again, relationships, career, finances, health. So if you'd like to learn to read your own or others' charts with a focus on how what seemed to be fated from the past can actually be overcome through free will into the future, then this is the class for you. Now, the class will begin Monday, January 23rd in the new year. It'll be on Zoom. It'll take place from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and as mentioned, it'll run for 8 weeks. So the recordings, of course, will be available for anyone who can't make it or misses a live session or two and wants to catch up or to re-listen to it. So for more information and or to sign up, please go to aspnj.org. That's Astrological Society of Princeton, New Jersey. So it's aspnj.org. And, of course, feel free to email me at Sheri, that's SHERI, at KarmicEvolution.com if you have any questions. All right, so let's get into this week's Astro news you can use. I think that we're probably all aware that the Gemini Full Moon occurred last night at 8:08 p.m. Pacific Time and 11:08 p.m. Eastern Time, at 16 degrees and 1 minute Gemini, and that Mars retrograde was occulted at that time by the moon, meaning the Gemini moon passed in front of Mars retrograde, therefore eclipsing it. And you may also recall what last week's guest, Ronnie Dreyer, said about this, which she posted yesterday on Facebook as well. So just to refresh your memory, I'm just going to read what she wrote yesterday. And this is a quote. "This is a fascinating full moon because it also occurs during the Sun-Mars opposition, which always occurs midway through the Mars retrograde cycle, which is when Mars appears closest to the Earth. The full moon is intense enough, but with Mars tightly conjoining the moon, I wrote this in my December newsletter last week." And here she quotes herself. "Two intense planetary signatures occur on the same day, which could make the few days before and after, meaning December 6th through the 10th, most intense and dramatic for better or worse. Something in the world can erupt that is martial in nature, meaning swift, aggressive, cutting, enterprising, hostile, and or assertive. This could include meteorological occurrences, attacks, sudden events involving world leaders, or more protests around the world. Because the full moon represents high tide, this could involve floods or tsunamis. Mostly, though, take care of the martial things you can control. So take deep breaths and do not react to the aggression of others during these few days. And she concludes by saying you can read more and sign up for my year ahead webinar at ronnydryer.com, which I highly endorse. So I will go back to pointing out that this lunation represents the culmination of the last new moon, and that's true, of course, for every full moon, right? It's going to be the height or the culmination of the last new moon. In this case, the last new moon was in Sagittarius on November 23rd, and I've already discussed the fact that it's then that we had the opportunity to plant seeds that could lead to a greater sense of hope and faith. I noted also that such faith might revolve around believing in moral justice, and that those who've acted arrogantly and or used power wrongly might have to pay the piper in due time. But some of that may have occurred as we were waxing closer to the Gemini full moon. So the first thing I want to talk about, which is really the news of the day, is that the fact that I woke up this morning, as did many of you, to the news that Brittney Griner, the WNBA basketball star who's been incarcerated, not only incarcerated in Russia, but sent to a penal colony, which is a rather harsh place to try to exist in, that at this Gemini full moon, well, I had wanted to talk about Brittney Griner a while ago, and I honestly don't remember if I got into any of it at all, but she has an untimed chart. So her data is October 18th, 1990. I post a noon chart, which always puts her her sun at the midheaven, but or in the 10th house. But she was born in Houston, Texas. So I again don't recall if I've noted this, but in her chart she has a yod. And she has, now I don't know the ascendant, I don't know the houses, but we can still look at the aspects. The only thing we're not 100% sure of is the moon. So I'm going to get into that in a minute. But she has a 14-degree, 31-minute Mars in Gemini, and it quincunxes her natal Pluto at 1648 Scorpio, and also quincunxes her natal Saturn at 19 degrees Capricorn and 19 degrees 14 minutes Capricorn. So Saturn is sextile her natal Pluto, but both of them are quincunxed by Mars. Now, both of those aspects are harsh, right? Now, quincunx, yes, is usually indicative of the fact that we need to make some kind of adjustment. Brittney Griner was married to a woman, and they got pregnant, and the marriage was annulled. But the ex-wife, or I don't know if that's a proper term from an annulment, but I think she sued for custody, and Brittney Griner, the bigger breadwinner, has to pay custody for the child. She subsequently remarried and is with a new wife now, but they were both arrested. There was domestic violence. All right. So what I want to point out is there's domestic violence in her past, and I believe that she was sent to what is it called? Anger management. Okay. So we know, because it's already documented in this person's life, that there's a lot of frustration, which is, in my opinion, Mars quincunx Saturn, and potential violence, which is Mars quincunx Pluto. Okay, so I went back and I looked, and I saw that when she had a Mars return somewhere around September 16th of this year, and it was around then that she missed the WNBA final, the finals starting on September 11th of this year, and that on September 14th of this year, she began her 8th month in the Russian prison. Now, of course, she was arrested at the airport because she had 2 vapes with some hashish oil in them. And according to Russian law, blah, 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 right? So what I also saw was that transiting Mars, which had not stationed retrograde yet, exact quincunx her Pluto again on September 21st. So Mars stationed retrograde on October 30th, and that was when he was at 25. Hang on, I want to run this as I'm talking to you because I was just too lazy to do it before. But, well, that's not true. I did it before. But so Mars was at 2536 when it stationed, and she has a 2503 Libra sun. Now at noon she has a 2542 Libra moon also, but we're not sure because noon it gives us the position of the moon, and there's a 6-degree leeway either way. All right, so let's leave the moon out of it for a moment. But she has a 2129 Venus in Libra, Mercury at 2238 Libra, and the Sun at 2503. So that Mars had already waxed into a trine, okay, to the Mercury and the Venus, but was pretty almost exact with the Sun. Now, I'd posit that it was around then that trine, and this was October 30th, right, might have set the stage, because a trine is easy movement, right? So on one hand, it was easy for them to, in Russia, to maintain her incarceration, and also eventually on November 17th, when the transiting retrograde Mars was at 23 Aries, it was also trining, only again, right? It was trining her Libra stellium. So I think that this trine probably actually provided the impetus. A trine sometimes is described as being on being on ice skates and having the wind push you from behind, where it's so free and so easy that you can't stop it. Anyway, that was when on November 17th they moved her to the penal colony. All right, and also the transiting Sun on that day was quincunx the transiting Mars retrograde. All right, so again, these are important quincunxes, but particularly the Mars quincunx Pluto in her chart. And last night, apparently, she was freed. So that's interesting. I had originally thought that might not happen until Mars quincunx Pluto exact, which doesn't happen until next year in March and in different signs. But the truth is that the sun, the moon occulting Mars, right, last night must have resulted in triggering this Mars yod, the yod, right, the Mars yod to Pluto and Saturn. So in any case, I just want to point that out because I think it's pretty fascinating that even with these more minor aspects in the chart, and even without knowing the time of birth, we can still get a pretty good indication. I wouldn't have predicted it. Like I said, I predicted that perhaps she would be freed when that Mars quincunx to Pluto became exact in March. But I do also, it occurred to me that when the Russians moved her to the penal colony, it was done for the purpose of getting the Americans to negotiate her release. Now, that release is for a major arms dealer named Victor Bout, and you can Google him if you'd like, but there's a lot of Mars-Pluto, and the fact that her exchange is for somebody who deals in arms and promotes violence and death, right? So I think that's pretty clear. Since we know that this Gemini full moon last night, under the auspices of which we are still, that it marks the Mercury retrograde's mid-cycle, which is, as we know, a turning point which can bring to the surface festering anger, rage, passion, ambition, repressed libido energies, or anything of that nature that's lain dormant in our unconscious, especially since October 30th when Mars stationed retrograde. And again, that was at 25 degrees, 36 or 7 minutes of Gemini. That there's been an increased potential, and still is, as Ronnie Dreyer said, for arguments, explosions, or violence based on simmering frustrations or tensions coming to a head between now and not only the exact Sun-Mars opposition, which was last night and this morning, but, the next couple of days. So I think this is especially true since both luminaries are waxing still at this lunation and now towards squares to newly direct Neptune in Pisces. So the moon perfected hers this morning, and the sun is building towards his exact square to Neptune, which will happen on December 12th. I wrote 14th here. I think it's the 12th. Nope, it's the 14th. I was right. Okay. So we're in this period now, right? Because that's going to be the waning part of the Gemini full moon energy. Anger at those whom we've suddenly discovered, because the sun quincunxed Uranus right before last night's Gemini full moon, which indicates we may have learned something that changed our viewpoint, our belief system suddenly. So anger at those whom we've suddenly discovered may have deceived us can surface now, aimed particularly at those who've denied factual reality and or equivocated, obfuscated, backtracked, or otherwise attempted to refuse to answer our questions directly. So we may rail on now also against the discovery of our own self-deceit. The fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me kind. So given these energies, even though the full moon has already occurred, we're only 12 hours after it or so right now, a little bit more. Given these energies, please watch for escalating arguments unnecessarily, as Ronnie Dreyer said, and try to avoid sudden, explosive, or violent events these next few days. Remember, this too shall pass. If you're heading into an argument, just think, I think I'll put it off for a couple of days, Let me go take a walk. Let me go to the gym. Let me do something to get my anger out, or go, visit a friend and have a cup of tea and a shoulder to cry on or whatever. Even though the Venus-Jupiter mutable square, which occurs on December 9th tomorrow, favors personal relationships, it may also find us in a bit too relaxed and content a state. I don't want to say lazy, but I'm a Taurus, so I know about lazy. So we may be a little bit too content, too relaxed to be disciplined enough to take any constructive action other than eating, drinking, or shopping, which is kind of, Venus, Jupiter are overindulgence, right? However, since Venus enters earthy Capricorn only hours later, on December 9th, and Mercury is already in Capricorn since December 6th, we kind of sober up and we'll bring our attention back to recognizing our more serious duties and obligations. Now, Venus and Saturn ruled Capricorn always asks us to evaluate the quid pro quos in our partnerships to ascertain if we're getting as good as we give or we're giving as good as we get. Works both ways, right? And this knowledge then becomes the means of determining whether to stay or go. So Saturn ruled Capricorn represents commitment and responsibility, and Venus transiting through this sign until January 2nd calls us to calculate now if and where our responsibilities to others actually lie, whether there's this quid pro quo, whether there's equality, whether there's fairness, and there's enough there to provide a long-term secure foundation in our relationships or not. Now, since the Sag Sun's also waxing into a sextile with Saturn and Aquarius, which won't perfect until December 12th, it's right now, through patient hard work and disciplined concentration, that greater clarity may emerge about relationships or anything else, but Saturn is often related to business, and be put to good use. So this is a time where if we work very hard now, between now and December 12th, we may well be praised or promoted for work done well now, but that may not occur until later or down the road, because Saturn has a way of delaying. So whatever happens now, or as a result of the Gemini full moon conjunct Mars retrograde and its occultation, the aftermath may shock us, yes, but it also may be used as a means to evaluate or reevaluate our future plans regarding both our partnerships and our mission or work. So that's an important kind of thing to understand. Now, I want to go back to the fact that, the November 23rd new moon, Sagittarius new moon, plants the seed, as I said earlier in the podcast, and that at a certain point, this lunar cycle waxes, and the culmination, as I said, at every full moon is the high point. So leading up to the Gemini new moon, full moon, we've had a huge amount of news, right? And which is not unusual because the full moon's in Gemini. In a nutshell, it's kind of like every full moon, right, reflects the light of the sun back to itself. So it shows the sun its shadow side. Because the sun is in Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius, and I've made this clear already, we're looking at issues of faith and hope, but we're also looking at the shadow side of Sagittarius, which is hubris and arrogance and excessive pride, and where that can create a fall from grace, which I mentioned last week. So it's interesting that there are several events that kind of boom, boom, boom happened over the last few days. And if we start with the most recent one, yesterday, we learned that 25 Germans who are part of the QAnon cult and who believe Germany is being run by the deep state were arrested for taking part in a plot to overturn the government there. They were thwarted before making their attempt. However, the parallels to the U.S. January 6th insurrection, which is based on similar conspiracy theories, including about election fraud, are somewhat striking. So here's this from yesterday's New York Times. The headline is, Germany arrests 25 suspected of planning to overthrow government. Among those detained were a German prince, a former far-right member of parliament, an active soldier, and former members of the police and elite special forces. Wow, right? You see the parallel? The plan was to storm the German capital, arrest lawmakers, and execute the chancellor. Hang Mike Pence! A prince descended from German nobility would take over as the new head of state, and a former far-right member of parliament would be put in charge of a national purge. To facilitate the coup, the electricity network would be sabotaged. Satellite phones to communicate off-grid had already been bought. That is what German prosecutors and intelligence officials say a nationwide far-right terrorist network was plotting before 3,000 police officers and special forces fanned out across the country on Wednesday to raid 150 homes and arrest 25 suspected co-conspirators. They included an active duty soldier, a former officer in the elite special forces, a police officer, and at least 2 Army reservists. Now, I didn't want to go down this rabbit hole, but if anyone wants to Google this German prince, there's interesting history there with him and the region of Germany that he comes from. And I believe he's in his 70s now, but it's pretty, it's a pretty interesting story. Anyway, the parallels are very clear, right? Things are not just happening here in the United States. We also have this news, also as reported in yesterday's New York Times, and here I quote, Peru's president tried to dissolve Congress. By day's end, he was arrested. Ahead of an impeachment vote by Congress, Pedro Castillo, the leader of Peru, tried to seize power in what was condemned as an attempted coup. Instead, Mr. Castillo was ousted and under arrest. His vice president was sworn in as president and became the first woman to lead Peru. So here we have two different things, right? I've spoken a lot in the past, Uranus in Taurus, and the changes in our sense of values and the issues around the matriarchy, issues around what's happened in this country with the, the doing away of rights for women to decide what to do with their own bodies. Meanwhile, in Iran, and here I quote again, protesters launched 3 days of nationwide strikes on Monday. There's already been riots and things going on for months now, ratcheting up pressure on the government, even after a senior official said the country's feared morality police had been shut down. The morality police's activities, and this is very martial, right, sparked months of protests after some of its agents detained 22-year-old Mahsa Amini for allegedly improper attire, and that was when she was accused of having some tufts of hair, like her bangs, come out of her hijab, and she died in police custody, reportedly beaten to death. Activists dismissed suggestions that the government was dismantling the police unit for good and called for escalating the protests. At least 470 people have been killed and about 18,000 arrested in a crackdown by security forces since the anti-government demonstrations began. And then, and this is from yesterday, but with a follow-up, but a couple days ago, we also have the fact that Ukrainian drones struck 2 Russian air bases hundreds of miles inside Russia, and that's according to the Kremlin. So Russia's defense ministry said 3 of its service members were killed. I believe it's more now. I think it's up to 11. At a strike in a base in Ryazan, southeast of Moscow. The other facility, the Engels 2 air base near the southwestern city of Saratov, houses Russian strategic bombers and has served as a launch point for attacks on Ukraine's power grid. Now, this has been updated since I think I wrote this, but an advisor to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky had tweeted, and I quote, "If something is launched into other countries' airspace, sooner or later unknown flying objects will return to departure point." So the point here is that Ukraine is saying attacking Russian land or bases or whatever, but inside Russian territory is turnabout is fair play. So if you're going to attack us and we have the capability, we're going to attack you. Now, the interesting part about that too, again, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, is that the Ukrainians reportedly used Russian drones. So they have older drones that they either repurposed or updated or something, and they used those to attack Russia. So there's an irony kind of there too, right? We have a little bit of the moon, sun, square, Neptune kind. It's like, oh yeah, well, we're going to beat you at your own game, but not only that, we're going to beat you using your own same tactics. So, again, I'd say there was plenty of a martial nature happening abroad during this waxing Gemini full moon and Mars retrograde lunation. Now, if we go to the domestic front, we can add much more news, which includes, of course, the fact that the Trump organization was found guilty by a jury of 17 different counts, including tax fraud and conspiracy to defraud the IRS, et cetera, And what I thought was interesting when taking a look at Trump's chart is to note that this Gemini full moon last night fell on his Uranus, which is 1753, the North Node at 20 and the Sun at 2055 of Gemini, right? So that's in his 10th house. It's interesting, though, because there was also, back on October 25th, the Scorpio eclipse at the solar eclipse at 2 degrees of Scorpio, and I don't recall if I said this at the time, fell on his 1 degree 31 minute Scorpio progressed ascendant. And I believe that it's changing the way that people perceive him, right? The ascendant is how other people see you, whether that's the truth or there's more hidden underneath. But I have always maintained that Trump has an extremely lucky chart. I know he has a wounded Jupiter, which is his wound in his second house in Libra, a wound to the ability to trust in partnerships and to believe in fairness, right? He's a good guys finish last kind of guy. And that it's related because it's conjunct Chiron and also Juno, which is the goddess asteroid of partnership. But they're all in Libra, which is the sign of partnership. So this Gemini full moon actually, and Mars, actually trine that stellium. And meanwhile, his progressed moon, which is now at 1546 of Libra in the second house, is already conjoined with his natal Juno and Chiron and is headed within the next month to 3 months to conjoin his Jupiter. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not he escapes, I guess, especially in this Trump organization, because this was related to the company, whether he escapes any kind of repercussions from that. But in addition, at this Gemini full moon, the sun at 16 degrees, 1 or 2 minutes of Sagittarius is in his fourth house. So we know that it's affected his home and his business, right? And since his business is a family-run business, it's affected his family. And the sun is waxing, as we speak, into a conjunction to his south node at 2045 of Sag and his moon at 2112 Sag. So it ain't over till it's over, but, I don't have high hopes that he's ever really going to go to jail, but there's a lot going on, as I said, and I just wanted to talk about how, again, because he has a Mercury square Neptune natally, right? He's excellent at projecting himself out to others as something other than what he actually is. And that's what I'm saying is changing now. People are beginning to become wiser, and then some people are beginning to become angry because of the transit at this Gemini full moon waxing towards their squares to Neptune, that they've been deceived, right? So some of the charges that the Trump organization was found guilty on was scheme to defraud, criminal tax fraud, falsifying business records, conspiracy, etc. And I was listening to Andrew Weissman, who is one of the former prosecutors for the Mueller team, who said, and I quote, "The jury was not technically required to find that Donald J. Trump was part of the conspiracy. There were two corporations on trial, the two control people, the CFO and controller, and the question was if it benefited the company. So the issue of whether Trump knew wasn't something that technically had to be found by the jury, and they weren't asked that. However, the trial included proof that Trump knew of this wide-ranging 15-year conspiracy ongoing at the two Trump organizations. The idea it was happening behind his back would seem laughable, and is part of the reason the jury came back so quickly in this case." And Harry Littman, who is a former prosecutor for the DOJ, is quoted as saying, "The actual sentence will be fines, but it does have implications for Trump and his family. It emboldened the Attorney General of New York, who has a civil suit against the Trump organization, and this will make her range of remedies broader. It will also stiffen the spine of New York DA Alvin Bragg, and just on the evidence and the trial, I think you can see this is a likely determination of Trump's involvement in the overall scheme." Now, Bragg is worried about going after the king if you can't kill him, but also evidence the jury found to be beyond a reasonable doubt may, strengthen his case, and quickly. And he ended by saying, "This is the best mock jury exercise ever for a real criminal trial." So what we may be looking at with the Trump Organization case is a foreshadow of what's yet to come. There was a New York Times reporter, Suzanne Gerber, who also said they're looking at I think it's a $1.6 million fine, and that's not tax deductible. But others have also noted it's not that much money considering. But in line with what I just said about the foreshadow, and in conjunction with other cases that Trump is involved in simultaneously right now, Michael Cohen, his old lawyer, called this particular verdict, and I quote, the death spiral for the Trump organization. And since this has occurred as we wax toward the Gemini full moon, and Gemini is communication and gossip and, talking to a lot of people, being talkative, loquacious, curious, asking questions, Harry Litman also said that the DOJ, and I quote, is going at him like a freight train. This may well give rise to cooperating witnesses who don't want to be beholden or hostage to Trump forever. So I thought, isn't that interesting? Because the Gemini full moons are releases, right? Are releasing some from their former feelings of either legal, fears about being legally bonded to Trump or the Trump organization. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So again, as we were in the waxing period of the Sag new moon headed towards the Gemini full moon, we had the win in Georgia of Senator Raphael Warnock, which now brings the total in the Senate to 51 Democrats and 49 Republicans. This eliminates the need for Vice President Kamala Harris to have to decide votes because they've got enough, presumably, on the Democratic side to to succeed, right? So again, these two things, and there are only two, there's more, we've seen the culmination of the growth of the planting of seeds that's led to a greater sense of faith in the justice system, right? And again, many of these affirmations of the justice system have centered on news about those who flouted the law by violating it and by making clear that they have felt above the law. We have also the announcement by the January 6th committee that they are going to make criminal referrals, although they haven't made clear, at least as far as I have heard up until this moment, they would make criminal referrals as part of the conclusion of their committee's investigation to the DOJ. We have yet to hear who they are going to refer. And also that the newly appointed DOJ prosecutor, Jack Smith, has issued subpoenas for those involved in submitting a fake slate of electors in the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona. So everyone seems to know at this point that the DOJ has made no bones about the fact that it tends to work from the bottom up. Started with prosecuting those who were literally present at the January 6th, 2021 insurrection in the Capitol, did damage there, threatened people, abused and used violence against Capitol police officers, etc., and is working its way up to the higher echelons. So this is one of those things that I think many of us might have thought, when are they going to go after those people? Like, is that just going to be like, oh, okay, they did that, and we're just going to turn the other way? So now the DOJ is giving us faith that they are doing the job that they're supposed to do. Because if anyone who keeps track of the news remembers, it isn't that long ago since many pundits and reporters and political people have been, congressional leaders have been criticizing the DOJ for not just going after the higher-ups, including, of course, Trump, and just getting to the task, right? So I want also to touch on someone else who's, well, there's two people, but just briefly, hang on, let me get his chart up here. There was news yesterday too, and it's sad news and not anything that any of us should be happy about. But Ted Cruz's daughter was apparently, she apparently attempted suicide. And I thought this was interesting, and I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but when I looked at, well, first of all, apparently, reportedly, she came out at the age of 13 in January as bisexual. She's now 14, and I don't have her birth data. And she apparently stabbed herself in the arm. It's unclear whether she was trying to cut her veins or how she was doing this. But again, they say she's in the hospital and she's fine. And, you know, in terms of the Sagittarius nature of this Gemini full moon, because it opposes the Sag sun, one of the things that they're reporting is how, unlike what we think Ted Cruz might have done by attacking the political person whose daughter had attempted to do this, the Democrats have been nothing but, for the most part, but, you know, extending their sympathies, right? So I took a look at his chart, and what I noticed is that, and again, we don't have an exact time. It has a C rating on Astro Databank, and there's another time, so I'm not going to go into that. He was born on December 22nd in 1970. They have it as 1 a.m. in Calgary, Canada. But he does come out with a south node in Leo at 26 degrees, 28 minutes, opposite in Aquarius, 28, 26. One of the reasons why perhaps this is not someone who should be a presidential candidate, because he's proven to be a bit more about himself and personal glory than about humanitarian subjects, you know, like dissing the LGBTQ community. And that he has a Venus opposite Saturn. Now, Venus is at 1734, so it wide squares his nodal system, but it was also quincunxed last night. And so that's an interesting thing. He actually has Jupiter at 2541, which squares his 2628 nodes. And to me, there's two ways to go with a square of Jupiter to the nodal axis. And that is that one, through karmic events, has lost faith. And so they either do not have faith, and when you don't have faith, that can result in not trusting people or being despondent about that, or it can result in what my mother used to call, she defined a superiority complex as an inferiority complex turned inside out. So in order to, and we see this with Trump, right, because he has a wounded Jupiter, that instead of being optimistic and be optimistic, he does express a lot of optimism over the top, but it's not that. It's that he does so in part because he's so pessimistic, but and he doesn't have faith in himself. This is what I'm trying to say. Now, I don't know if this is true, but a friend of mine told me that Ted Cruz didn't even fly back from Washington when this happened. So, again, I'm not saying that's gospel. I don't know for a fact. But we have somebody with also Venus square the nodes, and relationships might have tripped them up. And, you know, it's just a sad story. And finally, in the last few minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about Kanye West, who, of course, has been in the news since the November 20, or actually since right before, well, I think it was the 22nd that he met with Donald Trump, right? And how he, of course, is a new, well, I don't know, you know, most people seem to agree he's off his meds. I do believe his chart shows he's bipolar, and I will go into that another time. But he is a sun, Jupiter, and Gemini, and his sun is 17 degrees, 43 minutes of Gemini. So this Mars moon Gemini full moon hit his sun, which conjoins his Jupiter at 14, which is interesting because they both trine Donald Trump's Jupiter Libra stellium with Juno and Chiron, right? But also the sun at 1601 Sag conjoined or was just over his 1441 Neptune in his fourth house. Now, my assumption about him from the psychological level is, the sun opposite Neptune is somebody, especially when Neptune's in the fourth house, who didn't have a strong father figure. And it squares his Pisces moon, but again, we don't have his time. So he's June 8th, 1977, born in Atlanta, Georgia, and I ran a noon chart that's 1809 Pisces, but it could be 6 degrees more or 6 degrees less. So if we simply look at the fact that Neptune is opposing, his sun is opposing Neptune, and Neptune rules his moon because we know it's in Pisces during that 24-hour period, we've got somebody who doesn't have a strong sense of ego identity, has a psychic and energetic porousness around his emotions, and tends to exhibit mania because he's got that Jupiter involved, which also opposes the Neptune. Jupiter opposite Neptune can often indicate that, there's talent there, but you may not actually recognize it. I'm not familiar with his work. I'm an old person, and I'd like to do more research on him because he's revered as a wonderful, innovative, rapper and artist, and I don't doubt that in the least. So there's elements of genius here, but flying too high to the sun, of course, can melt your wings and bring you down. So there's a poignant sadness despite all of the disruption and hatred that he's fomenting right now. And for those of you who don't know, he was, at a dinner with Trump and Nick Fuentes, who is just a really off his rocker guy, who's a white supremacist, and apparently, Kanye West, or Ye, as a black man, has become a white supremacist. Talk about, I'm sorry, but if that's not crazy, I'm not quite sure what is. So we might denigrate him, hope he goes away, but we might also spare a drop of compassion for someone who I believe is clearly mentally ill. And, in the absence of a strong father figure, he kind of went from 0 to 100 and just anointed him God, right? Himself God, right? It's like if you have a father figure whom you revere, they're sort of godlike to you. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It just is what often happens, especially with the sun in frictional aspect to Neptune. And there's a void there that has to be filled. So sometimes we fill it with another person, or we glorify or idealize or idolize others. And in his case, he idolizes himself. Now, again, without a time, I don't have his exact rising sign, but it's crazy. And I think this full moon, as we waxed into it, he came to the culmination of crazy, especially with his latest remarks at the Alex Jones show, who, oh my God, is another one. Why is he still even on the air? And when is he going to go to jail? But those are other stories. So I just wanted to give you all a taste of how this lunation has played out and what's possibly in store, because I do believe that by the time the sun perfects its square to Neptune on December 14th, that this anger that's been precipitated from both the waxing portion of the cycle, new moon cycle, into this Gemini full moon, which just occurred, that we're going to be experiencing and expressing a lot more anger, as I said before, at those that we feel have deceived us. This doesn't bode well for people like Trump, who have already declared his candidacy for the 2024 presidential election. And it doesn't bode well for those who have bought into his big lie, like these fraudulent electors who signed papers that said that, they weren't going to endorse the popular vote, which of course is written in the Constitution they must do. So these are issues that will hopefully bring down the fantastical thinking and the illusory, illusion, confusion, and delusion wrought in parts of the collective that have really put us on some crazy trajectories, not just in the United States, as I mentioned, but in places like Germany as well, and Russia, which, perpetrated an entire war on, a fabricated fantasy. So, all right. Thank you, guys. I hope that you have found this week's information enlightening. I hope that you have found it to be important and detailed enough to understand. I urge you all to look at your own charts and to see where this lunation just occurred in the houses, because that's the most important thing, and if it's touching any particular natal points, because especially as we're moving into, like I said, that sun square, the sun square Neptune. I get spaced out every time Neptune's stationed. So even though he's stationed on the 6th, which is, I'm sorry, the 3rd, which is, almost 5 days away, it still has a little effect on me. Anyway, all told, that is it for today. And I want to thank everyone for joining me. And I hope you found the information presented here helpful, as I said, as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. And I hope all who celebrate the holidays, are gearing up for some fun times, and just want to tell everyone to be careful, as I said, over these next few days. And please be sure to join me next week on December 15th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free